Julian, how's it going?
Awesome. I know it's great. Great to be here. Thank you for having me.
Thank you for coming on. It's Ito, by the way. Nobody can get it right. I just let people
Ito.
kind of. Yeah, you're fine.
Ito. I am sorry. Ito's.
No,
Yeah.
yeah, you're yeah 9 out of 10 people. It's fine. Most people just yeah, it's spelled out IDO, and it's basically I do. That's what a lot of people get. So the
Right.
worst version from IDO is I do, and a
Right.
lot of I get that every once in a while in the bank. But yeah, it's Edo. It's actually from the Bible. So in Israel, it's like a really common name, but here, not so much.
Hey, being unique is something I would never trade away, and I like your name because of its uniqueness.
Sure, I appreciate it. So, Julian, the reason I reached out is I came across your content. Before I let you introduce yourself a little further, um, it was obvious that you're touching on a subject that's very close to heart for me, and always was kind of like a pinch because the idea of success and how we perceive it as a society has shifted over millennia, right? It's been moving around a lot, but generally speaking, I always felt like as a society we haven't had our meter for success and our metrics for it in the right place. I always felt in my heart that success is doing what you love and enjoying life and living this really really short ride that we have here and enjoying it in the present. But yet society measures it a totally different way, and it's not like you can just escape it altogether, especially if you're not taught to think that way. A lot of us, we just grow up with that idea of success. I'm including myself in that, all of us.
Yeah.
And we want things or think we want things that represent success in the eyes of many, or let's just say, the normal view of it. And we end up with something that, is a life that we didn't choose. And maybe in the eyes of others could look successful from the outside, but from the inside, it could be completely broken, rotten, miserable, and lead you all the way to actual physical death from illnesses and
It's true.
depression.
Yeah.
So your story really touched me because I thought, here's a classic story of somebody that um, didn't take their entire life to climb really really high. You spent your early academic years climbing like a rocket through very very difficult, challenging environments. Ivy League schools, finishing and graduating early from places, and something drove you to do that. So, in your intro of kind of like letting us know a little bit who you are, touch on that, and tell us what do you think now after experiencing what you've been experiencing due to those concepts of how we see success.
Yeah, of course. And so the short version of my story is I've always sort of been the model student. I graduated high school as valedictorian. I went on to UC Berkeley and I graduated 1 year early. I did several internships, one of them at the White House when I was at undergrad there. And I went straight through to law school. First, I was at NYU, then I transferred over to Harvard, and I graduated Harvard Law School at 24. I worked in a corporate job for a couple of years. And, let me start by saying, motivation wise, yes, it's true that it took a lot of fire to drive and push from basically 14 years old onward because high
Wow.
school starts when you're 14, right? And college apps look at your freshman year, and so it started that at that point, and it didn't slow down ever because
Hmm.
when I get to college, it's time to prove yourself again to get into law school. When you get into law school, it's time to prove yourself again to get the job, and when you get the job, it's time to prove yourself again to get the promotion, make the money, get the skills, etc., etc. The whole time, and I do still think I have a lot of this in me. I don't. I've always thought of my path here in the U.S. To some extent, it's been carved out by both my parents and, of course, their parents, my grandparents. And both my parents are first generation immigrants. They both, my mother came from Vietnam. My father's Armenian descent but came from France. And I just saw that they gave everything for me to have the opportunity here to go and make something of my life and my education here. And so,
Right.
what has driven me has always been the idea, to some extent, of not wanting to miss an opportunity, not wanting to live with regret, not wanting to look back and think, well, if only I had tried a little bit harder, right? And of course,
Sure.
taken to an extreme on the other side of what was going on in my life, there was a lot of mental health issues along the way. There was stress induced stomach aches in high school. There was Anxiety-induced gagging during my 20s. I had an endoscopy done for the same reason. There were, social anxiety left and right that I didn't even know that I had, simply because I was so high functioning that I could pass through the whole system and meet people, and it would be just fine, and no one would ever sit me down and be like, "Are you okay?" It never
Everything good?
once really right. It never once really happened because I was so good at knowing what to say, when to say it, just enough to pass under the radar. Or at least that's what I think
Right.
to myself. Looking back, I think everyone around me, at least my close friends, probably knew, like, dude, you need to chill out. um, but
Yeah,
but
it's
I
good to
think
have people that actually know you and can call you out.
right, exactly. But I think that there's a lot of lessons to be learned, and that's what I've kind of been doing since I quit my job as a corporate attorney this past July, is advocating for these ideas in mental health and in success, and telling people out there, this message that I think needs to be shared more often, which is, like, neither of these things are mutually exclusive to me, right? I'm very clear to say that to folks in our community, which is like, you can have the success and still push yourself, but also be mentally okay and have your mental health in
Mm.
order. In my opinion, a large part of the problem right now is that we don't understand mental health. We are only very early stages of understanding and learning and figuring it out together. We are nowhere near the level where we're proactively checking in on folks. We are really making sure people understand what they're going through and have children in elementary schools learning about these lessons from an early age. Mental health was something that at most it was skimmed over in a seminar in my undergrad. And maybe in law school there was something during orientation week. The fact that I don't remember kind of tells you it was not ever a big priority.
Hmm.
And I think about that when I think about my story and what success really means, because of course you can have all the trophies and the awards and the money, but if you're not happy, and if you're not going to be happy, and if you never were happy, at a
Right.
certain point, something's gonna give. And I think a lot of attorneys are in similar shoes to the shoes that I was in, and of course not just attorneys, but many people out there in all fields. And
Sure.
we need a sort of cultural revolution in this way to rewire what we kind of value and to remind people to some extent of the bigger picture here, because we are so often caught up in the small details. Okay, so that was going to be a short story that was very long, so I'll
No,
turn it
it's
back to
exactly
you.
what we wanted to hear. I appreciate you sharing, and it's very interesting what you're saying. I think that like everything in life, the answer really lies in some level of balance. I agree that we do need, if we wanted to see that type of change, we do need some revolution culturally in understanding what success really means as an individual, and redefine it. You can also argue that if people focus more on mental health rather than productivity, and we redefine what success means, then the human race takes a different path when it comes to moving forward as we evolve and keep growing as a species. Because where we got here today has a lot to do with how we define success, whether it's good for mental health or not. So that's something I think about a lot, because on the individual, let's just call it the selfish level, I prefer to put mental health above all, especially now that I've suffered with it. I had PTSD from war and
Mm.
all kinds of other anxieties, and I know a lot of the pains you've went through, including physical manifestation of these things. Um, so I know that once that hits, it doesn't really matter, what you've built that on top of, or what led you here. All that matters is getting better, and that should be that way. So it's an interesting thought exercise to think, like, where do we want to go as a species? And I feel like the best answer, as usual, is finding some kind of a balance and also educating early on people to find themselves, check themselves regularly when it comes to mental health and peer to peer, making sure that we're checking ourselves as a society. Something you said, and also in some of your TikTok videos I've seen you've touched on, that we don't really want to do. We're not educated inside in our awareness to do. But worse than that, it's the machoism bullshit behind it that has a lot with I can't even talk about it
Yeah,
myself because that would promote other people to think that I'm weak.
yeah,
What are your thoughts on on
yeah,
those
yeah.
perceptions?
Yeah, I think you did. You hit the nail on the head here, and it's fascinating to me because throughout my journey into law and into this arena of mental health, I never thought, if you asked me 5-10 years ago, would I be here sitting as an advocate for the mental health ideology of 2021, 2022, I would have said, I don't think so at all. I have no inclination at all. I have no idea how I'd end up there. And yet I'm in here now, and I'm making a lot of noise, as much noise as I can, that is. And this is something I keep seeing over and over and over, is this argument of, or I should say it's maybe rooted in jealousy or hate or malice, however you want to define it. It's the idea that if you quit to focus on mental health, or if you focus on mental health at all, or if you say something about how you feel, and I notice this more geared towards, at least myself as a man, I think we do have a gendered issue here, but I think to some extent it's not gendered. I think people say this no matter what, is yes, that you are weak, right? You couldn't handle it, right? You couldn't. The idea of strength being imputed to destroying your own mental health is frankly how I perceive it. And it makes literally no sense to me, because what's left if you're so strong and you take on the burden, you take on the hustle, the grit, the grind, you push through it, that's great. But then at the end of it, what's left of you? I mean, like, isn't that the point of, like you said, our short time here is to some extent enjoy the ride at least a little bit. If not, we're not going to enjoy it. Can we at least try to enjoy it? But I think, honestly, I don't really have much of an answer for that argument because it's so stupid. It doesn't even approach the level of recognition in my mind that justifies a response. Because the folks who, and let me say, I'm not just going to name call it stupid, right? Let's play the logic out. If you continue in a path where you are miserable, but you don't want to quit because you don't want to be weak, and you stay miserable, well, I have countless friends. I have people in our network, my network, that I have seen that go down that road, that become alcoholics, that become chronically depressed, that get severe anxiety, that in some cases end their own life, right? And so when everyone is sitting at the person's funeral, like, is it the person in the back corner that's saying, well, at least they were really strong? Like, no one is saying that, right? Because at that point, everyone is wondering, what could we have done differently? And I think the unspoken thing, which is not to say that folks support networks do this, of course they don't, but I think the unspoken narrative here amongst a lot of people in their own head, and I think in some sense pushed on by these trolls on the internet and whomever, I don't know, probably not even trolls, there's probably people out there in the public sphere saying it too, is again this false narrative and dichotomy of strength equals destroying your own identity for something else. And usually the irony, the something else is money. Like, let's be honest. Most people, when they look at my story, like, look, if I said that right? If I quit my job and I said, I'm going to focus on mental health, but also I became a crypto millionaire and I'm doing stuff with that money now, no one's going to call me weak suddenly, right? Because I have money, because money is somehow imputed with power and glory and respect. I don't know, you name it. And of course, money is very powerful. I'm not demeaning that, but it all comes back to this output-driven focus and way of thinking. And that's okay to a certain extent, but I think the point you raised is a very important one, which is that we are focusing way too hard on the output here, to the point that we are criticizing and demeaning those people who are focusing more on the input, which is, what are they doing with their time and how does that actually better them and make them feel, as opposed to, oh, well, at least I'm getting a paycheck even though I'm an alcoholic now and I'm totally miserable, and like 50% of attorneys or some crazy statistic get a divorce, in their first 10 years of their career, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
That's insane.
I'm exaggerating. I don't think it's 50%, but I guarantee you it's an unreasonably high number.
To your point, yeah, it's kind of scary because the issue that we're talking about here is a positive feedback loop. If we as a society put that symbol on it, which means, oh, you want to talk about your feelings, especially as a male, but in general, that represents weakness, then immediately it labels it with shame, meaning you can't really put it out there. So what happens, why I'm saying it's a positive feedback loop, is if it's something to be ashamed of and you hide it, then it's just going to amplify. It might take a year, it might take 2, it might take 5. But like you said, some people, we were built differently, but some people end up on their track of this positive feedback loop. Like, oh, I feel horrible, but I'm going to, suppress it. I feel horrible, I'm going to suppress it. Yes. That mountain builds up and something will give. Sometime it's a gun to the head, and sometimes it's, crazy anxiety or physical manifestation of these things. You were talking about gagging uncontrollably. I had seizures where, with no relation to Nothing but the PTSD itself just would make me fully blank out and fall on the floor. Uh, and I was like, okay, I guess your mind can do
Yes.
these things after all.
Yes.
And I was exactly in your shoes where I thought, 2, 3 years before all that happens, like PTSD can make me feel things or do things or lose perception of reality for multiple minutes. I don't think that's even possible.
Right.
I mean, heck, I didn't even believe in going to therapy. I had
Yeah.
to hit rock bottom for that to happen.
Yeah.
So that just shows, myself that, I, take myself for a pretty open-minded person, that all these perceptions from society of what we're talking about here were very real for me. Because even though I thought I was open-minded, I was still embedded in that system where, showing weaknesses is weak. Showing weaknesses is not your representation of the toughness that's associated with being successful in society.
Yeah.
And that's how you hit rock bottom, and you're like, oh, here's the truth. Hits you in the face real quick.
Yeah. Yeah. And you're the fact, you're doing really great work by both sharing your own story and helping others like myself share theirs, because we're going to be the people, some of them, in amongst the millions of others out there, who will hopefully prevent the future Ito and the future Julian from taking that path of denial and pride and stubbornness, and to some extent, I'm not going to blame what we were socialized to think, but at the very least, we'll create a counter narrative to help people, like you said, have just more of an open mind about it and consider it, as opposed to just write it off until we hit rock bottom. And of course, the climb up is going to be that much longer because we fell that low along the way. So yeah, I think it's.
Yeah, no, I love what you said. It brings me to a point that I've been kind of arguing with friends about over the last few weeks. Being involved in content creation, I've noticed that the new cool is authenticity.
Mm-hmm.
It used to be, when major platforms came out like Facebook and especially Instagram, the cool was Lambo. The cool was, watch my rental car behind me that I'm going to take a picture against the sunset of Malibu and take, everybody thinks I have a great life, right? And just extrapolate that on everything, right? My food's the best, my partying's the best, my life is the best.
Yeah.
So that's my Instagram page.
Yeah.
And that was the cool. That's what everybody wanted to do it with, and that's what everybody wanted to see on it. But that changed significantly. Now, when first of all, Instagram is kind of like
yes.
crashing, but for all kinds of reasons. But generally speaking, I think it has to do with the fact that we're evolving as a people, as a species, to want something else. And I feel like maybe it's the optimist in me, but to me, it feels like we're evolving to a place where people want authenticity. They're not sure yet that they want to give it, but they definitely want to consume it.
Yes.
And slowly, more and more people realize the power of authenticity, which means here's me, real me, the truthful me, and how much value does it give to you? And obviously, we're consuming it. You're a perfect example of it. What do you think about that?
Yeah. I think you're 100% correct. And there's a lot of things going on. I would add. I mean, I think TikTok being the platform that has, for now at least, dominated short form video, has also taken us a step further, because of course with a photo and text. I mean, when I started getting into content creation, the first thing I realized about Instagram is like, wait a minute, this is literally just a photo with text. Like, that's all Instagram. Like, if you think about it, if you deconstruct it, I could do a photo of me doing anything, and then just a paragraph of text about anything, and that's just a post. Like, it doesn't have to go together. It doesn't necessarily need, even though, like you were saying, I think most influencers, as they were called, would just do like, look at me, I'm in Paris, look at me, I'm in a Ferrari and whatnot, and that's cool. But now it's a little bit different in that no one even cares anymore almost what you're posting as the photo necessarily, as much as, oh, does it look nice? Is it good on my eyes? And then is the text something readable that's interesting? But
sure.
Yes, I think naturally, I would argue to some extent, we've always wanted authenticity. We've always enjoyed it. We've always liked consuming it. What's changed, in my opinion, is the platform's ability to give people authenticity, and the form in which the authenticity comes has changed. Because when Facebook dominated social media and owned everything, aside from YouTube was still its own thing. Of course, it's owned by Google, whatever. But YouTube has had some semblance of this authenticity for the folks that are big on YouTube for a long time. Instagram and Facebook no longer have as much power now because TikTok has, of course, undermined them and taken a lot of their authority in culture and in tech away. And I think it's a good thing, like you said, because we need more realness out there. When kids are spending, and myself included, hours of their day on these platforms that is showering you with nothing but positivity and false perceptions of people's lives and how happy and fulfilled they are, that is only going to make you feel worse. Because the natural
When you say positivity, you mean fakeness.
Sorry, yes, I should add, not constructive positivity, but the outward perception of positivity in the form of look at me and how successful I am, look at me and how pretty I am, look at me and how awesome everything is in my life, right? It's never the darker side, it's never the more authentic side. And I do think, like you said, we're heading in a direction, thankfully, that's a little bit more real, but we have a long way to go. Because even on TikTok, I will tell you, the attention span of our species is getting exponentially shorter, which is horrifying because it was already shorter than a goldfish's like 10 years ago. And the problem with that is that realness is realness, but it's not satisfying for the short attention span, right? It's real, but we're not interested in real anymore. Our attention span is so conditioned to this false sense of real. For example, I can tell you this, like as a content creator myself, I've found that I've had more success with videos lately where I do something in the video and I record myself. Let's say I'm doing pull-ups and I do it on 2x speed. And I record myself doing pull-ups. And then I answer a question about the law and I do a voiceover. So, it has nothing to do with me doing pull-ups, right? But I'm answering the question like, here's what it is to be a senior partner, et cetera, et cetera. And those videos just do better because I'm legitimately overstimulating the consumer's brain, right? Because me talking like this is no longer enough to captivate someone who is so used to all of the content hitting their eyeballs, at least on TikTok. And maybe this will change over time. I hope it will, but Lord, I don't even know because it's evolving by the month and it seems to be going in a direction of overstimulation becoming the norm, which has a whole set of its own problems that I won't get into. Yeah, exactly. But I do think the authenticity point that you made is a good one, and I do think it's increasing. So your friends are wrong.
Hopefully. Yeah, you're kind of crashing my dream here, but we'll see. No, I think you said it right. We're conditioned. There's no two ways around that. And to condition ourselves from one state to another, it's going to take some time, and we can't really predict where this is going. We can only hope. And of course, we can influence it. I hate the word influencers.
I know.
I don't know how they came up with that. They got to come up with a new name for these people. But if we can, as content creators, influence it or push it in the right direction, I think it's our responsibility. Because the way I see it, all these platforms came about in the last 10 years. They gave us the power to express ourselves very fast, radically, and almost anonymously in many cases. So I'm not talking 4chan, 8chan anonymous. Even on Twitter, many people are anonymous,
TikTok,
right? If they're not breaking the law in a disgusting way, they're going to stay anonymous.
Yeah.
And it gave us also the keys to this newly discovered human, ability, which is tearing society apart, basically piece by piece from the individual level onwards. Online, and also later on, that type of habit and behavior goes home. It goes to your holiday dinner where a disagreement over politics turns into don't come to my house anymore. Sister, grandma, parent, these things happen. People stop seeing their own family and friends over stuff that we used to be able to just kind of joke about, hug it out, and get out of our way. So I hope that we're conditioning ourselves back to a better place where, authenticity and kindness rules. But I don't know.
No, I think it's a great point. And the other thing that I would, you raised a great point, which is anonymity. And I've noticed this as I've explored different platforms of content creation, like LinkedIn, for example, where your identity is tied to your existence on the platform. If I, Julian Sarafian, say something, you click my profile, you see my resume, you see where I went to school, you see me, you don't see random username 4725040 million.
Right.
And what comes with that is a lot of hesitation amongst the population on LinkedIn to engage with material that could be deemed as controversial. That could be deemed as taking a side, right? You see on that side of the spectrum people taking their words very seriously and being very careful. And of course, on the other side, in the depths of TikTok, where people are anonymous, but if it's not just TikTok, like you said, it's Twitter and these other platforms, you see people who build up this false sense of confidence and courage because they have the power now to send a message without tying it to their identity. And I
Right.
do
There's
think
no
that
accountability.
there is no accountability. And because there's no accountability, people are going to be more willing, like you said, to spew hatred, to spew extreme viewpoints that they otherwise wouldn't say out in public. When you're in the public square and you're saying something, you need to have salt behind your words to say it because you're there and people are watching you say it. So if someone comes up
Right.
and says, I disagree, you're going to have to call it out. People are going to watch you. You're going to be judged based on who you are. But now, because you can hide, people, the ideas on both ends, on every direction, have gotten much more extreme. And of course, the internet hasn't just allowed us to become anonymous, it's allowed us to connect with like minded people. And you combine this anonymity and this false sense of courage with the radicalization of people on any ideological spectrum, simply because you're putting all of them in an echo chamber, myself included to some extent. All my stuff is liberal. I don't ask for that. I have conservative friends,
Right.
but the platforms don't care. The platforms just want me to stay engaged and to click so that Facebook and Mark Zuckerberg get more billions. That's fine. And of course, you get this problem, like you said, of things falling apart to some extent, people getting radicalized. But I do think in the long run, look, I mean, I have never seen as much attention in the legislative and regulatory sphere for big tech as I've seen in the last 2 years.
I was going to ask you right about that.
Yeah, I think Facebook, now Meta, whatever, has fallen out of the good graces of most of the American public. It's ironic to me that it took a Chinese company, TikTok, taking the lead in the digital sphere for this to happen. As listen, I've said this as a TikTok creator myself. I view TikTok very much as a national security threat, simply because it is owned by China, and we need to be more aware and cognizant of the power dynamics that are happening with culture and attention and where we are getting our information. Because, of course, TikTok is a great app, and I've gleaned a ton from it, and it's a career that I'm in now that I only have because of the creators of the app. At the same time, I can say, as an American citizen, it does concern me.
Sure. No, I totally am. I'm driving on the same vibe here because it's whatever you want to say about it. There's always going to be narratives and motives that are beyond most of our perceptions, right? As just citizens of the world. There's bigger players in everything. And to be quite honest, it's been a race that's have been ongoing for, I don't know, let's just call it 100 years, maybe longer.
Yeah.
That the China and the U.S. and Russia, these are very big powers, and there's humans behind them, so they're imperfect. And those always going to be that reach into what I can do to this country to have a little bit more control.
Yeah.
Not always because I want to destroy them.
Yeah.
But it's just a natural way of maintaining, some level of being a superpower.
It is.
So if people are saying, "Oh, TikTok, is innocent," and I'm in drones. Sorry for the blubber. I am in drones, and so DJI, for example, has been also deemed, it's a drone manufacturer, the largest one, and by government, they're not allowed to be used in the States for government use for now. Who knows how far that ban would go, but I get it. These apps, these technologies, software in general, they have backdoors. I just saw somebody on TikTok that I invited on the podcast. He's into cybersecurity, and just for a small example, not saying that everything is evil, but these are like smart lamps that you buy on eBay. If you don't want to buy Philips smart lamps, you buy these off-brand. And he, being a cybersecurity guy, just wanted to test them out and see what they do software-wise. So immediately as he hooks it up to the house, they start connecting to China servers.
Yep.
Now, I don't know what information can you take from that that's valuable. The point is, these softwares have backdoors. These products do have that, and it's a threat that is beyond me to explain, but it is a real thing. And the scary part is you were talking about anonymity, and this is really where this kind of strikes all the way home for me, is that you don't even know who's radicalizing you. So the hard part is when you see a group of people radicalized so far to the extent they're willing to go to the street and fight each other, but behind that could have been a small force of X country's hackers. I'm not going to say specifically Russia or China or whoever wants, has any ill intentions for the U.S., but anybody, Taliban, right? It doesn't matter. Anybody that wants to mess around on Twitter and on Facebook to cause harm, physical harm to people, but even worse, mental harm, they can do that
Yep.
relatively easily
Yep.
anonymously
Yep.
or with false identities. That's the part that scares me the most, and that's the part I wanted to kind of start turning this back to you, given that you've been exposed to the law, um, especially very recently in the academic
Yeah.
world, but also in the corporate world.
Yeah.
What is where are we going to go with this to make this a little better?
Yeah.
Because it's a little extreme to say
Yeah.
everybody has to have a digital identity that has to be verified.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, it's funny. We say that, but then at the same time, we talk about how, in many countries, you can no longer have, I believe, masks or even burqas on for either reasons because, I'm not going to get into whether it's religious discrimination or simply because for the masks, at least, when you don't want people to remain anonymous, I won't comment. The point is we can regulate anything we want. The U.S.,
Sure.
Russia, China, any governmental entity and body can decide, yes, we want to regulate, and it does not need to be a digital passport. We don't need a fingerprint to scan it a face, but it doesn't need to be that strong. But for example, you could require a profile picture. You could require someone having a name, and the way you're going to get there, ultimately, I think we've gone too far in the Wild West in the internet on the regulatory side. We have just let people do anything, and we've allowed platforms to basically allow everything happen, good, bad, evil, ugly, and we've trusted them wrongly. This always happens in the U.S. at least historically. This is my opinion. Is we allow free market to just do what it does, and it's created incredibly productive tools, and I'm not wronging it, but at the same time, sometimes we go a little bit too far, and we don't regulate it enough. And so, yeah, I mean, long-term, look, there are legislative proposals to essentially increase the liability on these tech companies. I think it's Section 230 is one of the regulatory proposals being floated that would essentially change, the liability shield that tech companies have currently. But the bottom line is going to be the same, whether it's 230 or a different act that Congress passes. We need to just be a little bit more serious about holding these platforms accountable for what they are allowing. And all it looks like is a fine for these companies when they are found to have violated it. You're not going to throw anyone in jail. I guess you could if we care that much. But the more important thing is that we need everyone in society who's willing to be decent human beings and speak our minds without a mask and without the radicalization and as normal people. We need to go to one platform, okay? And then those folks who are going to spout radical ideologies and backwards, whatever you want to call it, just the stuff that in the old days they'd be relegated to the basement of whatever their parents' house because no one would give them the time of day because nobody cared because they're irrelevant because they're random face of the internet. That's what we need to do just in the digital world. That's the only difference here. And the way that we do that is by deplatforming to some extent these ideologies and these folks who don't stick to their words, of course. And look, it's complicated. There's free speech concerns, there's ethical problems, but I think we've gone much too far on the way of letting people figure it out themselves, and we've given the platforms way too much power. And if nothing else, we need to take power away from those platforms.
Sure, I'm not educated enough on the subject to have a solid opinion, but I can share my gut feeling and what I feel like is my common sense. Is that I agree that we need to take power away from these companies and regulate it. I agree that they need to be held accountable, and sometimes that might mean that they, as companies, as platforms, are going to crack down on their regulation because they can't really regulate, the Wild West. They need to make it less wild for them to even be able to be held accountable. Because if you are, let's just say, overseeing a group of kids who are all like hanging out with swords and BB guns and firearms, and then somebody tells you, oh, anything that happens with these guys, it's on you, then in that case, I'd probably take all the weapons away from them and ask them to play nice. So I see that happening too. In regards of, free speech and ethics, I see there's a million complications, and I know that probably 50-50 of the audience will always scream like, extreme free speech and nothing but free speech, and some would say, well, there's room for regulation. And the biggest problem is that when governments and companies are going to try to do that, it's going to be perceived as overreach, because in many times it was. Um, but I do agree that if there was internet, right, general internet, where being involved in it, respectively, legally, would be tied to you being, first of all, a real person. That's one, and two, not anonymous. I think it's not that horrible of an idea, and I'd love to debate somebody who thinks they know more about that subject, because I'm admittedly not very deep into that world. But just to compare it to real life for a second, you can't just, if you want to participate in society, you need an identity, right? From the moment you're born. We always see that scene in the movie where like they arrest a guy for not having a driver's license on him, right? It's a real thing. We need to have an identity. You can't just walk the streets without an identity. You can't, have a fair trial without an identity. You can't have a lot of things, and those are things you want if you want to participate in society. If you're a free bird that just roams the grass and the meadows of somewhere, and you don't want to talk to anybody, and you're off the grid, free bird, do your thing. I can't convince anybody like that, but anybody that wants to participate in society, which is the vast majority of all of us, has to take into consideration that maybe the best way in this case here is to have, identical or identity related accountability.
Yeah. Yeah, I fully agree. And it's funny because we talk about this like as if it's theoretical, and yet you have apps like Bumble, one of the most successful dating apps that exists, right? Bumble is very particular with, for example, they've created a mechanism to verify your own profile by scanning photos of yourself and pictures of your ID, so that now when you're out there dating, you have a check mark saying, I'm a real person, I'm not going to catfish
Right.
you. And
Right.
of course, Bumble
Just like a driver for Uber.
That's exactly right. So, relax. Sorry. And and Bumble is doing incredibly well, in part because their clientele and their customers trust their platform, because their platform has created an instrument by which they can verify other people. And so this is why I think government needs to step in at a certain extent, because right now it's a race to the bottom. It's a race to engage and steal people's attention, not steal, I should say, but garner people's attention. And the easiest way to garner the most attention possible is to allow anyone to say anything. Because if you allow anyone to say everything, you have every single market of content: hate speech, sexism, racism, mental health, law,
Whatever
philosophy,
sells, yeah.
whatever you want, right? And you don't even have to have your identity type. And then you go to LinkedIn, where it's a little more limited, and suddenly it's not as sexy. You don't have as many people engaging because no one's talking about super controversial stuff on there, because no one wants to be.
I don't know when I ever saw hate speech on LinkedIn.
As well. Yeah, career wouldn't last very long if they were making that move, at least in my opinion. But the
Right.
point, the point still stands that like it's an arbitrary line that we have collectively decided to draw argumentatively, right? Now we're concerned about free speech. Here's a good example. Are we still upset about Trump being banned on Twitter? Are there still people out there? Maybe there are some. I guarantee there are some. But as far as I'm concerned, in the world that I see, in the news that I'm reading, in the attention that humankind is giving to this issue, we have moved on. And I think people need to recognize and understand that free speech is a concern until it's not, right? Caring about certain people being censored and these extravagantly blown up fears that are, in my opinion, way out of proportion, they're only fears until you realize, oh, wait, the platform is just going to ban literally the things that we find the most problematic collectively, and then we will move on. And of course, I'm not saying that we should regulate all speech. I agree there are censorship concerns. But I really do think that we need a sort of reality check here.
Absolutely. Those are great examples. And I'll add to that, just recently, not too long ago, maybe less than a year ago, I was still in the same mindset that I had carried around most of my life, which was the normal, common type of mindset around free speech, which is there is no such thing as too much free speech. That was just my uneducated agenda. It was kind of like my, that's what people blah, 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 say, and I just hear it, and I say it too. Blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
So, and I felt kind of comfortable around it. It seemed like a rather simple subject. The moment something changed for me around that subject is when I saw a documentary. Um, what is it called? Into the Storm. I'll link the video or whatever, a picture of it here, and it was about QAnon.
Mm-hmm.
And in there, they're yeah, you know where this is going. So then they really show a deep look into 4chan and 8chan and the creators of these boards, um, and the actual real world destruction that they can bring. And there's it's insane, but really a lot of school shooters were
Yep.
encouraged there. The mosque shooter in New Zealand. I don't even want to talk about the level of anti-Semitism that comes out of that, but
Yeah.
just generally speaking, the absolute anonymity in a board like that, it really breeds something that can very quickly turn evil.
Yeah.
Um, I see that maybe there's value to anonymity in some cases, and maybe it should be, facilitated in a certain way, where, as long as because some, you've dealt with introvert, being an introvert, your life, right? Maybe you want a place where you can share your technological ideas, and you don't want to be shamed for, being dumb because they didn't make sense to somebody else. So go on your anonymous technology board. But once you start talking about, getting Hitler back in society,
Right.
and killing people in real life, I don't care what platform you're at. That shit has to be stopped. I mean, I think collectively, 95, 99% of people would say kill it. Cut the
Yep.
cord on that one,
Yep.
and we still allow it to happen. So there happened that shift where I was like, oh, there is a thing that's called too much free speech. When you combine, because it didn't used to be like that before the age of technology, before the age of social platforms. We just had people, right? People in the street, people talking to each other. That type of radicalization doesn't happen that quickly and that easily
It never will.
in the street, because you have to look at my face. I have to be convincing. I can't really deal with the fact that you're now talking back at me and giving me counter arguments that I have no really a good way to prepare, or that's what happens on 4chan. I have all night to prepare my meme answer to you. There's no urgency, and there's no
Right.
accountability. So those it took a really long time to say. I think those types of websites are an easy place to start killing and regulating some of that over. Some people call it free speech. I call it, we went too far speech.
Yeah, I fully agree. I mean, look, we've always had regulatory regimes for things like the newspaper, things like the mass media, television to some extent, radio. I mean, there are regulatory regimes for these entities. I won't recite them off the top of my head because I don't care to, but if you look them up, I guarantee there is some level of liability that is imposed on these companies that are these platforms. There are some safeguards for misinformation, I am sure, in the form of at least at the very minimum defamation and libel. I know, and we've, because of the democratization of the internet and the way that everybody can now use their voice, I think we've hesitated, like you said, a little bit in imposing similar sorts of restrictions either on the platform or the individual. But I fully agree with you. It's a long past due. And just to build on your analogy real quick on talking to folks in the streets and radicalizing them, the other big issue or differentiating factor of the internet is you can radicalize someone 3,000 miles away, no problem now. Good luck doing that before the internet. Have fun going across the country and finding one person every 3,000 miles that believes in what you believe in. But now you are connected to everybody out there, and the algorithms that be want your attention, so they will give you the exact thing you're looking for. It does not take long. And the algorithms are only getting better and better, and the content that we are putting out into the internet is getting closer and closer and closer to what people believe in. So, yeah,
Sure.
the time to act is long overdue. And yeah, I agree with you.
Absolutely. And what was the phrase from Spider-Man? Uncle Ben said, "With great power comes great responsibility."
Right.
And it really fits into a lot of subjects in life, but specifically here, content creators nowadays, like you said, have such extreme reach, especially if their message is provocative and extreme. Hopefully, also when it's useful and valuable. But regardless, it goes a long, long way, and that means that as content creators, there's a and that means everybody, not just somebody that does it for a job. Anybody that puts a video out there, the level of responsibility that you now have over what you're, puking out of your mouth just increased by tens of thousands of percents because endless amounts of people can see this and your touch on the world increases a lot. So it really matters more what you say. It used to not matter that much, especially because you could just, like you said, if we compare it to the street again, you can just go out there, say some bullshit. And even if, really, even if it didn't go that well, people will literally forget.
Yeah.
Or you can move. But welcome to the digital world where everything you say forever lives.
Yep.
Forever.
It's written in ink.
One way or another. Even if you click delete on your video, it lives somewhere.
It does.
In some backup cloud.
It does.
So that is some level of accountability that I appreciate, and I think more people should be aware of the fact that that's how it works. So before they go and say stupid shit online, maybe they have a second thought. Is this one true? Is it valuable? Am I improving the world or making it worse?
Yeah.
I mean, just these basic questions. But outside of that, enough on this topic specifically. I feel like the grab on attention. Have you seen The Social Dilemma on Netflix?
Parts of it, yes. I know the
Yeah.
premise of yeah.
You know the premise. Okay, so I mean, it's the currency of all times, right? This
Yep.
is what we're after right
That's
now.
right.
And what from a legal perspective, what do you think is a way to improve on that so you can allow and incentivize companies to let go of that currency and help us heal from this? Because I get why they need it. I get why it makes them profitable, but I also understand that the consequence on our slot machine dopamine,
Yes.
it's ruining us.
Attentive
you know?
health. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's complicated. I won't pretend to know all the nuances of this debate, and I know there are debates happening. I had one friend who told me that we need to essentially regulate attention in some way, shape, or form, and make attention something that we analyze, something that we pour data into and understand better, so that we can look at these platforms and give them some sort of benchmarks that we can hopefully create for, like you said, understanding. If nothing else, let's just understand, like, what are we doing to people? what is happening on the other end of the
Right.
screen based on what the algorithm is giving people? And look, frankly, it's not like we're in the end times, of course not. But I think in the long run, what needs to happen is the consumer needs to take a step back and think about critically, what is it that they want? And if we collectively make the decision that we want something a little bit better, and I think in the long run, we're getting there. Let me say, right? I mean, for example, Instagram is now going back to a chronological news feed starting next year. That was a big change that they had made previously that basically made Instagram like Facebook, where they can show you anything at any time. Now, no more. It's going to be chronological again because people are like, yo, this sucks. Bring back the chronological news feed. It's like, there is, if consumers band together, right, and if there is enough competition in the market, like, we will get what
I
we
forgot
want.
that was a thing.
Right. Right. And well, and listen, and like, I'm on Instagram. It's like, I don't want to see this memes page, man. Like, I want to see my friends with their babies. Like, that's why I was on Instagram. But like, now I just get these memes, and don't get me wrong, the memes are fire. But like, I want a better mix. And so they understand that because they have to, because TikTok is whooping them, right? And it shouldn't be up to them. Government should have some hand in it. How we get there, that's a tough question. And I think it's going to be debated in the next 10 to 20 years after we get across this liability concern and the free speech issues that we've been discussing.
Interesting point. And to build on what you said and kind of put a bow on it, I feel like it is going to require a combination because you said it best. We, the consumers, make what happens with these things. A lot of people say that we, the media, the mainstream media is like all corrupt and whatnot. And, maybe to some parts of it could be true or not, but what it's showing us, whether it's your favorite CNN or Fox News, I don't care what you watch, it's what we taught it to show, and what we decided to give more attention to. So as long as we consume the garbage, big surprise, they're gonna make more garbage and better
Yeah.
garbage,
Yeah.
so that's the hard part. So fixing that, I think, is really not on the companies, because the easiest thing to do is blame, right? Hey, Facebook, fix it.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. Precisely.
that's the easiest thing to do. The hard thing to do is individuals, as a collective, need to improve what
Yeah.
we're willing and accepting to consume.
Yeah.
What are we allowing in our brains? And that actually does seem to have an uprising, just like we had in, food, right? America of dietary America of 20 years ago is not dietary America of today. Nutritionally, like even McDonald's is picking up on the fucking salad, right? It's
Yeah.
getting better.
It's true. Yeah. Yeah.
So
Exactly.
I think we're going
Because
in the same
consumers want it.
direction.
Because consumers
Exactly.
demand it. Because Chipotle
Because
came along.
awareness.
Because Chipotle
Right.
created fast casual, and now I could pay $8 for a Big Mac or burrito bowl. I'm getting the burrito bowl, dude. And they learned, like you said. Sorry to interrupt you, but I completely agree.
No, it's a perfect input, and that's exactly where we're going mentally. I think
Yes.
that
Right.
what we allowed, because CNN and Fox and mainstream media, that's not new. That's been happening for
Yeah.
what, 100 years.
Eons.
So even our parents and their parents have been suffering from the same brainwash that they allowed to happen. I think millennials are beginning to, but really it's happening in Gen Zs that are like, no, you cannot put that in through my eyeballs and through my ears. No, thank you. And they're getting less and less. They allow less and less of it through. So maybe as we improve as a people, as a society, on what we allow to enter our bodies, our brains, our mental capacity, that's going to be one half of the story that's going to make a big difference. But I also am going to want to require companies like Facebook, Twitter, and all of those to start thinking, okay, I want this guy to go down a rabbit hole of attention. I want him to use my product as long as I can, but also at what price and at what point do I start shifting him away? Even gambling does it, right? Like when people see gamblers that are ruining themselves, then somewhere away on the way to their house, there's going to be a sign, Gamblers Anonymous, 1-800, let's save your life because you're about to lose everything. We don't want that, weight on society. Same thing for mental health. Like we don't want to constantly drive people down that horrible dopamine excessive rabbit hole that's ruining them just because that's what the algorithm says. So on the other half of the equation, if one was people and what they want and their awareness, I would say is the company and their ethics and what we regulate them and what we allow them to do. How far can you go to grab my attention before you tell yourself your code and your moral system that you're going to shift me away from that and even suggest me to get away from this,
Yeah, and I think something you mentioned earlier that I found interesting is how Gen Z may be reshaping this landscape. And it's funny for me to watch because I've written pieces for American Lawyer and Bloomberg Law, and I see the sort of traffic that these platforms like the New York Times and CNN and all of these other news platforms get. And you compare it now to TikTok, where a high schooler can talk about pop culture with a green screen of a news article and get millions of views overnight. Look, this is people's entire brand on the platform, is talking about pop culture, just giving people information. They're not taking a side. They're purely, hey guys, this is what's happening. There you go. These people are getting more coverage and attention than the New York Times. And what that reflects is the fact that collectively, like you're saying, there are more people who are buying into what TikTok as a platform is offering than the New York Times. And what's going to happen eventually, mark my words, the New York Times will adapt. The New York Times will go onto TikTok and start trying to make content on TikTok because they don't want to be irrelevant forever. And their demographics, I'm not going to guess, but probably like a 42-year-old liberal, probably, I don't know. But like it's certainly above 35, and that's fine, right? But as the times change, the competition I think is only going to become greater for building trust with human beings, because all of this is about trust to me. What platform you use, what news organization you go to, what leader you believe in, it's all about trust. It's all about how do we feel by this person's presence? Do we trust them? Do we not? We're getting closer and closer to a world of perfect information where, like you said, everything we do is written in ink. This conversation, if I run for office in 30 years, is going to be scrubbed by 1,000 people. And that's never been the case historically, but it will be now. And what people will flock to at the end of the day is something consistent, because humans like certainty. Uncertainty means the unknown. We don't like the unknown. We stray to certainty. If you can trust something, you will believe in it. And that goes, TikTok is a great example of how they have catered and created a platform that allows creators like myself or these Gen Zers to build trust with their audiences. And it shows you the scale and how quickly now we can reach with these platforms, where you are competing and overtaking in many ways the attention that you get comparing yourself to the major news organizations of the United States, or arguably the world. It's fascinating stuff. And it's the democratization of information in more ways than one. And it's only going to increase, in my opinion, at least.
Sure. And on top of that, I feel, first of all, I like where this is going generally as a direction. I like that we're going to where more, basically the best stuff rises, right?
Yes.
This is it's kind of like a voting system for Reddit, you know,
Yep.
or Quora, if you've ever been on.
Yep.
So the garbage stays below,
Right.
and the good stuff that everybody approves of rises.
Yep.
Sometimes not so great stuff is going to rise, and sometimes great stuff is going to rise. Most of the time, great or not, it's what everybody wants. So maybe we can reteach ourselves to consume that way, and it's already happening. Like you said, there's a good example online. If you're into finance, meet Kevin as this YouTuber. He's like a powerhouse of YouTube. I mean, the guy has, I don't even know how many millions of views every day. And the point is, he curates information for you.
Right. Exactly.
You don't need to go to CNN. You don't need to go to Fox. You don't need to have an agenda overlaid your information.
Yes, exactly.
Just give it to me as it is. You know?
Yes.
And also offer your professional input or your experienced input. And that's what people are flocking to. Like you said, it's these long form conversations with Joe Rogan. I know he's kind of controversial these years, or especially recently, but at the end of the day, there's conversation. And when there's conversation, instead of just a snippet that's overlaid with my boss's agenda on how this has to look,
that's right,
something magical happens. And facilitating that type of conversation, I think, is going to be, like we said in the very beginning, authenticity is going to be the new cool. So these companies are going to have to catch on and jump on the wagon. And the only question that I have for them is, are they going to be quick enough?
Yeah,
because some of them will crash and burn, and they're managed by people that are so, excuse my being an ageist, but old and hard-headed.
Oh, very much so.
And we are all going to be that way. That's just how the nature of humanity works. We start like we think we know it all, and then after that we realize we don't, and at the very end we just curate into one mold that thinks that's it, we have it figured out. But then next generation proves us wrong again and again. So it'll be interesting.
Yeah, it's funny that you mentioned the big companies and how authenticity is what builds the brand at the beginning. Because look, I don't know the history, but I guarantee you, if you go back in time to when these companies were founded, CNN or the conglomerate, I don't know who owns them at this point, probably Fox or Warner Brothers or one of the big ones. But you name it, New York Times, Washington Post, whatever. Well, I guarantee you, they got started by putting out good content. That's it. All of these organizations, institutions, it's all just content. It's just information, like you said, that's curated in a certain way. And they've built that trust and that brand. All their brand is a collective, aggregate, hypothetical cloud of trust amongst a certain population. In my example earlier, it's the 42-year-old liberal for the New York Times. Or for TikTok, it's the 18-year-old Gen Zer. But in any case, it matters less what they're doing, and it matters more that they're building their brand and that they're building that trust. And what the internet has allowed us to do, like you said, is democratize it. And it's exciting. It's exciting for creators like you and me who can have these conversations and broadcast it to potentially millions of people and compete with the New York Times for attention. Because now, like you said, we no longer need to take the word of these journals or these organizations as truth off its face, or even necessarily take their perspective, like you said, into account as truth, because we have a more diverse array of thought out there.
Options is good. We like options.
We do like options.
Awesome. Well, let's take a heart right and go back to something that is very interesting to me about you, and go a little bit more personal.
Yeah.
Let's start with why law. I saw some videos about you talking. You started maybe looking into more pre-med in high school years, and then after that you transitioned into law, which is a major difference. They're both I would say inside the box of the elite professions,
Hmm.
but at the same time very different from each other. So why the first and why the second?
So when I was in high school and growing up, I didn't really know what I wanted to do. There's a joke that if you're in an Asian household, you have three options: doctor, lawyer, career. Sorry, doctor, lawyer, engineer, not career. All three are careers though.
Or
And
astronaut,
or astronaut, that's right. And not to promote a stereotype, but I wanted some sort of stable career as a kid. I always thought about like, well, that kind of makes sense to me intuitively, is doing something that's stable, and medicine seems like a good career path. So I'm just going to think about that. And over time, especially my senior year of high school, when I took economics and government, I found that I was much more interested in politics and the law in general. And so I pivoted away and thought, well, it's just that stable career path. It intersects with the business, government, regulatory, and legal regimes, all of which I find very interesting. And it's a terminal degree, which I wanted. I wanted to get a terminal degree. It wasn't enough for me just to do undergrad. I wanted something beyond it. So I set my sights on it, and I never looked back. You fast forward, I go through law school and decide I wanted to practice corporate law. I didn't want to do litigation. I did that for a couple of years, and of course now I've kind of turned that page and gone on to other things, at least for now, which I'm happy to unpack. But that was kind of the background on why I chose law and how I got into it.
Okay, and that prompts another question in my head, which is, what draw you to law and politics in general? You're a kid, 17, 18 years old, and this is usually a subject that's reserved for adults, right? It's like it's for the old people.
Yeah.
Like I don't want to be that. It's like it's the Antichrist for Peter Pan. Why that?
Yeah. I'm privileged to grow up with parents who I think have always been engaged, from a civic sense, very much in the know and aware of what's happening in a big picture level. And so I think I've always, if not been in the conversations, I've been listening to them. And that has kind of primed me to just pay attention to the bigger picture and the policy issues that we're facing. But when I matured enough to actually read about these issues and understand them and learn them, for me, it was about the power. Because there's nothing more empowering to me than being part of the system that can help lift up other people. And there's many ways to do that and participate in that sort of style. And of course, what I'm doing now is not even law, it's advocacy in general, and that's how I'm doing it. But law to me was a vehicle, and the vehicle that I wanted to chase, that would get me the tools that I needed to bring out that empowerment that I sought, both for myself and of course the underprivileged, the underserved, and those, not just in our country, but abroad and everywhere.
Right. And yeah, you have those tools whether you decided to stay in that course right now or not. Those are tools in your toolbox,
Yeah.
which are are very powerful. And let me ask you, I've heard you say something in one of your videos. I forget exactly what it was about, but it was around the subject of law having or not having, in some people's mind, a deeper, more philosophized meaning than it really is. And I think you said, correct me if I'm wrong, that you see it more as a means to an end and a way to control and regulate what we want to be,
That's
the
right.
result of life. Because with regulation and rules, we've talked a lot about it in this conversation. We have to caveat and say that there's advantages and disadvantages to having rules, right?
Yeah.
They're limiting and they're also freeing. They're liberating in some way. So you get to not be murdered at your own home, or at least limit it to a very, far extent, but also, limitations on firearms per se are this and that. So you can say it's limiting and freeing and liberating at the same time, but
Yeah.
it's what you choose to participate in, right? Because
Yeah.
I don't want to live in North Korea, but I also don't want to live in the wild where I have to provide my own food and there's no, like, I can't get shish kebab,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
So what are your some of your thoughts on like people that observe law as something that is deeper than just a system of rules that's designed to help us live a better and easier life?
Yeah, I think it's just made up. Like, to be frank, I'm sitting here and I'm a law student. Yes, let me remind everyone I went to Harvard Law School. Okay, I'm not just some rando. I went there. Sure, I didn't practice constitutional law for 30 years. I'm not going to debate that, all right? I practiced corporate law for 2.5 years. I'm asking you to trust that I've seen enough here to know that these are words on a page, and the pages are different. It could be the Constitution, it could be regulatory rule book of an agency. It could be an executive order. It's words on a page. Okay, and the words have authority. The authority depends. Is it the Constitution? Is it an executive order? Right. What page it's on determines how much authority we have. Who decides what we put on this? Well, we collectively decide. We elect the president.
Right.
We elect Congress men and women and senators. We elect both houses plus the president to nominate Supreme Court justices that then interpret the Constitution. But at the end of the day, this is just all a mechanism, an instrument for us to ask ourselves and answer the question, what do we want? What do we not want? The things that we want, we will promote. The things that we want, we will incentivize, we will subsidize, we will put money in public schools. We will allow community college to be free for certain jurisdictions and cities. I'm not sure if it's all community colleges under the infrastructure plan that passed, but talking heads out there can correct me. What we do not want is murdering in the streets. We do not want an AK machine gun nuke in someone's whatever, right? You get my point. But these are all just decisions made by us, and we put them into the law, and the law is the way that we have constructed this regime to regulate ourselves as human beings. And of course, it takes different shapes and sizes based on the governance structure and system you're in. But my point in saying that it's a means to an end is simply an observation that I found a lot of law school, and of course I was at Harvard, so I think it tends to be a lot more theoretical, but I think in general there are just, dare I say, like millions of hours of time spent per year amongst like academics, jurists, people in the legal field that are analyzing these higher, deeper, quote unquote, meanings and philosophies of the Constitution and the law itself. And they're writing these 20-page law review articles. And this is not meant to be hatred at all. I think it's great. I think it's a great interest, right? I think it's important to some extent to be had. But I personally just don't think that a lot of this stuff has a lot of purpose in the long run. Because in the long run, if the American public really agrees that we should legalize queer marriage, the Constitution can say whatever it wants. The Supreme Court is going to side with the American public in the long run, and it happens every time, and maybe it'll prove me wrong in the future. I know it's proved me wrong in some smaller cases, but in the long run, we regulate ourselves, and the law
majority of cases is what matters.
That's right. And so I just think the law, it's just an instrument, and I think the more we can look at it that way, the easier and more approachable it becomes, because I fear to some extent that you have this whole mystique that surrounds the law itself that scares people. I mean, in many cases, it scares people just outright. They don't want to touch it. They don't want to be near it. They don't want to even be on the wrong side of a lawyer because they're afraid of what the law as a weapon can do. And of course, they're justified in that. There are a lot of people who use their law degrees out there for unscrupulous reasons. But I think we also need to remember that the law is simply a mechanism by which our voice has been translated into an incentive structure. And if you think of it that way, look, you can help create that incentive structure if you speak up. And that's the honest truth to the whole system, at least my opinion.
Yeah, no, it's a very good description. I appreciate you putting it in these words. And just, we said it a second ago, there's going to be advantages and disadvantages to this. So if you have a tool that was made by humans and is used by humans, it's going to be used for good things and bad things. That's just how it works.
That's right.
Because we're greedy, corrupt motherfuckers. We're not just, perfect beings,
Yeah.
It's true. It's just human nature. So seems like the majority of people are good. And then every once in a while, there's going to be those bad apples that have to be there to define what good even means. And, allow us to have that spectrum. But moving on that subject, Elon Musk really said something that interests me, and he recently said on a very recent interview, maybe even his last one, and he said that there's too much regulations. Like, he was asked, what can we do if you were like in Congress or whatnot, hypothetical situation, what would you do? And he would say he would help make sure that we start clearing out the garbage of regulation and rules and laws, because he says that there's no mechanism to clean it. And he means by that, we make a lot of it, but there's no real merit to keep every law for the rest of time. And a lot of regulations just seem to exist forever. And in many times, all we do to basically live with them is find workarounds. But do you think in law, is it something that gets revised enough to where it makes sense, or it's also kind of full of stuff that don't make sense anymore?
Yeah, I mean,
Don't have
look,
merit.
I am certain there are hundreds of things on the books that make no sense that are probably holding us back in some way. Okay, let me start there.
Mm.
At the same time, I think we can all probably agree, and I think Elon would agree with this too. It is not as black and white as saying we have to stop regulating entirely. We have to strip out everything. Of course, the ideal world that we should live in is one that balances the interests, looks at what is the most efficient method of regulating what it is that we want to regulate, and putting that into practice. Of course, that's a lot more difficult in practice, and that's why the federal government has grown tremendously in the past 50, 100 years, not because we love big government, but because we have started regulating more and more things, and that's not easy. That takes a lot of time. It takes a lot of rulemaking. It takes executive agencies. It takes more and more and more staff. And with layers of complexity that we live in this country, I don't know if there's a simple solution here. The best we can do is try better the next time by way of if we think that we didn't do something well with the Affordable Care Act, let's go back and let's amend it. If we think we didn't do well with Dodd-Frank, let's go back and let's amend it. Let's improve on what exists and let's keep sculpting. But there's no silver bullet. There never will be, because there's always going to be complexities and nuances in an ever-changing landscape, economically, socially, politically, you name it. And
Right.
Elon, it's funny that he talks about like not having a regulatory regime to some extent. This isn't a regulatory regime, but this certainly was government being involved when Tesla took on subsidies from the federal government back in the day that helped the company in its earliest days. That's government involvement. You want to call it regulation or subsidy, tomato. It's the government putting resources into something. Regulation is the enforcement arm. Subsidies is the giving arm. It's the carrot and the stick. But it's all government action at the end of the day. And that's a great example of how government can be used for something incredibly important, which is helping fledgling companies like electric vehicle companies start out in a market that is otherwise going to be too competitive for them, capital intensive wise at the beginning, to sustain themselves. And of course, look, I personally am a big fan of Tesla and what they've built, and I don't even know the metric tons of carbon and CO2 that they've hopefully saved by existing. But look, I think we can all probably agree that it's better that they're around than that they're not. I'm sure some people will disagree with that, but what are you going to do?
Yeah, well, there's always going to be two sides of the aisle. There's no doubt about it. And yeah, I agree that stuff is complex and it's a spaghetti bowl of problems. And quite honestly, I find myself more often than not just looking into a situation and saying, well, if you take this thing out or put this thing in, you think you solved one thing, but you don't even know the other things that are going to get entangled in that later on. So sometimes you just have to play it by ear and roll with the punches, put something into shape and form and into law per se, and then see how it rolls out and do revisions as it goes. And, in my very, very humble opinion, I'm by no means even educated on the subject. I would think that it would be a cool mechanism to have, that when we make laws, it would have some type of an expiration date that if you don't extend it by being aware of it and thinking about it and say, oh, do we even need to? It requires some kind of a mandatory checkup. Like, oh, do we still need people not walking on the roofs in San Francisco? I don't know. I'm just making up shit. And maybe the answer is no. That was actually made in the 30s because there was electric lines there. I don't know.
You raise a good point, which is that time should be some variable that we use and lever in legislation. I've always thought that it's fascinating that you don't tie minimum wage to inflation, because inflation is literally the degradation of spending power. Minimum implies minimum, but when you combine minimum with degradation, it's not minimum, it's descending. Right. So it's not really a minimum wage. It's a descending wage over time because we're not tying it to inflation. And when you explain this to most people will be like, oh, that makes sense. Let's tie it to inflation. But of course we haven't. And maybe there's a hesitancy of humankind. Maybe it's a risk thing of not wanting to be held to our word, in 2010 when we're 10 years past. I don't know what it is, but
horizon.
Or maybe you and I should be governor and president. I don't know, right? But I certainly,
no.
But I certainly agree that time is a valuable commodity. Of course it is, and we should absolutely leverage it to the extent we can in legislation when it makes sense to. Yeah.
So let me go to our closing questions. what would you say to people that are currently thinking about uh, pursuing a route of excellence
Right.
as it perceived from academia, and your advice on the self check they need to do
Yeah.
on themselves to see if that's even what they want, and also on generally pursuing that type of runway, because it's not a obvious one, it's a difficult one.
Yeah. Yeah. I would say a couple things. The first is when deciding what it is that you're chasing, try your best. And I say try your best because I think this is going to always be a challenge for folks who are high achieving in general. To look at and analyze how do you feel when you're actually putting in the work to get what it is that you're seeking at the end. I call it, what are you looking at via input and what are you looking at via output? I think most high achievers, we look at the output. We're output driven. We're goal oriented. We do what it takes to get the thing at the end. And so I would challenge people to think a little bit more about, do I enjoy the thing that I'm doing now to get to where I want to be in the future? Of course, the reason this is a challenge is because a lot of the times in academia and in the world we're in now, the way it's structured is that the input is necessarily going to feel different than the output, because being a lawyer is necessarily different than going to law school or being pre-law. I can't look at my economics studies and think, is this what I love? Well, it doesn't matter if it's what I love, dude. It's undergrad. Like you're going to school like 15 hours a week and having fun, and it's great and it's a lot of work, but it's not the end game, and you're not going to know what the end game is until you get there. So try your best is what I would tell people in understanding. Maybe if it's not school, think about things outside of your quote unquote career that may interest you, and start developing and pursuing those interests, because I think what people will find in the long run, and I'm catching up and doing this late in my life, but I think what people will find eventually is that will enhance your career. And the things that you do in your time outside of your traditional career path can very easily become your career in this day and age. And that's never been the case, but it's more possible now than it ever has been before. Now, as to the advice for folks who are staying on this path, who want and who are striving for this higher level of academic achievement, my 2 cents to them is to challenge them to do that and keep the cylinders all firing. That's fine, but also think critically and learn how to focus and manage your own mental health, because like I said at the beginning of our conversation, you can do both. You can be me and graduate Berkeley and go on to Harvard Law School and graduate at 24, while also not gagging on my own spit and eventually descending into depression during the pandemic. You can have both. It just depends on how seriously and how well you manage your mental health. Because in my opinion, it is all about management. It's just energy, time, and discipline.
And priority.
That's discipline, right? Prioritization, I completely agree, and then discipline, which both can be used kind of as synonyms, but they go hand in hand. And we just don't. We're not. Everyone is left to their own vices on this right now, and that's the problem. Is everyone is being given all these fun tools like TikTok, and we're in a society that tells everyone go go go, push push push, but we're not telling people as much to like, hey, learn how to take 10 deep breaths a day, 1 minute a day, and do that every day.
Sure.
And so I
Very
think
fucking simple.
it honestly is, but like you said, it takes prioritization and it takes discipline, and those are not easy, no matter what it is that you're chasing. If you're chasing success, it is not easy to get down and study 12 hours a day. Like it's a lot of energy, it's a lot of work, but you can do both. And so what I would just tell people is realize that you can do both and just challenge yourself a little bit, because ultimately you can not listen to me, but you're going to end up just like I did. I guarantee it, because we're not that complicated of machines. At the end of the day, if you put all of this stress on us and you don't adequately manage your mental health, it will deteriorate. That's just how it works. It's like math.
Right.
But you can absolutely do both, and the more you do it at an earlier age, the easier it will be to manage in the long run, and the less energy it'll take in the long run too. So,
Be sure. And overall, I think it's going to make you a better person to
Yes.
yourself and to other people.
yeah, completely agree.
Amazing. I have your closing question here.
All right.
And this is this is something that you've touched on in your videos, and you feel free to go elaborate on it as much as you want or not. But generally speaking, it's known that in Olympian gold medalists and in Olympians in general, but specifically gold medalists, which some researchers were done on, once that moment has come, gold medal, my entire journey I can look back on and what led me to this point. and I'm standing on the podium, and the TV is on, and I'm welcomed back by the president, they say that there's a moment of like, fuck, what's next?
Right.
The pit. Looking into the pit. Like,
Yep.
nothing can compare to what just happened.
Right.
And you've touched on it. You said, like, what comes after success, right? And that was the words. Those were the words you used. So, what is your take on it, and what would you advise people, since you've already reached,
Yeah.
you can call it a pinnacle of success in certain areas of your life? What would you say to
Yeah.
people that how to handle that?
Yeah, I mean, in some ways it's multifaceted, because I don't want to preach to the converted and be a broken record and say, oh, if you chase your passion and you love the process, then you never worry about the output or the success, because the success was you putting the energy in at the beginning. Of course, that's part of it, but it's not that simple, because like for the Olympians example is a great one. Once you've worked that hard, you've hit that pinnacle, but let's say you've aged out of the Olympics now and you're a little bit older, what are you going to do next? Then I think you need to challenge yourself to come up with the next goal or the next passion or the next thing for you to chase. And it takes the same level of discipline and practice, but here's the part that gets tricky for a lot of people, and myself included. It takes imagination. It takes the same imagination that you had when you were a 5-year-old kid. It takes sitting in that and thinking and feeling and observing to guide you into something you've never tried before, and then cater yourself into that new interest that you've developed. So there's not a simple answer here. People will always set goals, and then people will reach them, and there will always be a constant evolving process of whack-a-mole for high-achieving people like Olympians. If you enjoy the process itself, that's the most important thing. But secondary to that, I don't think there is an answer, and I think that's in some ways it's scary, but in other ways you have to accept it. And once you accept it, things become a lot more fun, because you're a kid playing around in a giant playground. And every little tool out there, every book, every person, they're all just little things that you can use to amuse yourself and play with and see what you like. And eventually, unless you're what I would argue is a very boring person, you will find a lot of things that interest you, that drive you, that motivate you. But it takes that level of self-acceptance and humility to move on from the thing you were on before and chase something else after. And that's part of the impetus that drove me to leave my job and leave the law. Was I didn't see a future in it for me. I don't care what you want to call my past by way of success or achievement. I was not interested in it. I noticed the energy it was giving me and what I was putting into it, and that ratio to me was not something that I wanted. And so I moved on to other things, and not a day too late or too soon. So
yeah, and thankfully you did it early. Many people go 40 years before they realize it. And I would say, on top of everything you just said, to just close on that to people that are in a position where they feel stuck, like they feel like they went too far, now they have to continue, right? I've invested too much time, effort, money into something. The point, and this is where the sunk cost fallacy comes in.
That's right.
Yeah, it's whatever you've spent, first of all, it's already yours. You've gained the experience.
Yeah.
You've gained the knowledge. You've gained the failures, everything that came along with your process up to this point. Wherever you are in life, you're not leaving this behind and moving on empty. You're taking all of this with you to your next thing.
Yeah.
So walking away from something that seemed like it had been a great investment in your life, and now you're starting something new, is not starting from zero.
Yeah.
A lot of people are like, oh, it's a new ladder and I got to start from zero. No.
Right.
Even if you start with a new company that you have no record with, you're still bringing all your experience and all your knowledge and all your abilities that you've acquired up to this point to the next place. So I really hope that we can encourage people to feel good about moving on from one thing to another and do different things and try different things, and then be encouraged to, live a little, if you will. So they're not worried about getting, stuck on, I was in law for 40 years, so if I don't do law for another 20 years, it was a waste of my life.
Yeah.
Wrong. Do everything.
Yeah.
Your experience is going to be a huge part of your fuel tank for whatever else next comes in life.
Yeah.
And also, probably without it, you wouldn't be where you are today, which is much more educated and smart about mental health, right?
Yeah.
It's just a part of our process. But let's close on that. I know you're short on time. Julian, Thank you so much for jumping on. It was amazing. I think there's so much value to be extracted out of this, and I hope that your viewers and fans already that exist on TikTok would find a deep dive to who Julian is insightful. And yeah, let's leave it with that. I appreciate you coming on.
Thank you, Ito. Pleasure to be on.
All right, man. Take it easy.